Good evening, everyone. My name is Larissa Buhin-Koenig, and I'm the Dean of Undergraduate Studies and a Professor of Psychology, and I would like to welcome you all to Touro College, Berlin. Established in 1970 to focus on higher education for the Jewish community in New York City, Touro College and University System has grown to serve over 18,000 students across 35 schools in 4 countries. Touro College Berlin established its first undergraduate programs in 2003. The choice of Berlin was deliberate, meant to honor the proud Jewish history of the city, remind of the tragedy of the Holocaust, and contribute to the revitalization of Jewish life and culture in all of Germany. As the Touro College and University System expanded, our focus has remained on serving diverse communities and creating a warm, tolerant, multicultural, and intellectually vigorous environment. We believe in the dignity of all and strive to contribute toward a society that does as well. Our campus is situated in the charming Charlottenburg district of Berlin in a Bauhaus villa with a profound history. The home originally belonged to Paul and Minnie Lindemann and their children, Eva and Klaus, and was designed by the German architect Bruno Paul in the late 1920s. When the Nazis seized power in the 1930s, the Lindemanns were forced to emigrate, and their home at Amrupenhorn became the official residence of the Reichschurch minister. When the war ended in 1945, the house was handed over to Allied forces and was used as a learning center for the British military in the years following the war. The Berlin Senate Administration for Youth took over the house in the 1950s, and it became a place for the promotion of international encounters with a focus on democratic development and intercultural understanding for half a century. When Touro College Berlin moved in, the tradition of intercultural interaction and learning flourished. We see tonight's discussion as a continuation of historical events that took place on our campus. Hate destroying idyllic family life, times of great darkness, fear, and tragedy, the resilience of the human spirit, and a continued need to protect democracy, diversity, human dignity, and to promote values that benefit the entirety of the human community. And we're really happy to have you join us. With our Berlin lecture series, we strive to engage in dialogues on a variety of historic and contemporary topics, always mindful of our academic values, intellectual engagement, multiculturalism, and respect. Now I would like to introduce to you our moderator for this evening's event, Professor Dr. Özen Odağ. Professor Odağ is a media psychologist and a cultural psychologist. Her research focuses on the empowering sides of the internet, aiming to find out how disadvantaged groups such as migrants and ethnic minorities use digital media to shape their identities and give voice to their communities. Professor Odağ has examined the empowering impact of social media for disenfranchised populations in autocratic societies, as well as the anti-democratic effects of social media in processes of radicalization and exclusion. She has also studied the ways in which social media are used in the context of collective action and political participation, and how social media facilitate mobilization and protest participation. A connecting line through this research has been a culture perspective. Professor Odağ has integrated into her research notions of cultural and ethnic identity and cross-cultural research designs. She is currently launching a series of studies on the effects of online hate speech on emerging adults with the long-term aim to develop intervention studies in this area. Please welcome Professor Odağ.
Ladies and gentlemen, Larissa, Professor Buhin, thank you so much for this moving introduction. Actually, I'm speechless. And now I'm supposed to speak. Okay, and I shall do so. I want to just express how happy I am that so many of you are here this evening. I welcome you warmly to our panel on the challenges of online hate in times of crisis. I'm very happy that roughly over 80 people at the moment have joined us today from all corners of the world. And I'm really impressed by how technology has this ability to connect individuals globally and bring people together, really bring people into my 10 square meter office in the middle of Kreuzberg, Berlin. I'm very impressed by that. Needless to say, none of this would be possible in the analog world. But today we're not here to discuss the numerous and countless benefits of technology and internet media. We're actually here to talk about some of the disadvantages and some of the dark sides of internet technology in terms of online hate expressed in numerous ways, especially on the internet. Online hate has really become an intractable challenge for societies around the globe, autocratic and democratic societies included. It has become a common issue now in the World Wide Web. We see it really everywhere. Derogatory expressions of hate against racial groups and religious groups, ethnic minorities, other social groups. These are no exceptions anymore today. And in times of crisis, they have a tendency to rise, to surge. Radical fringe groups, as well as right-wing populist sections of society, are using the anxious atmosphere of our pandemic times to exploit the situation and spread populist rhetoric. And online hate has taken a variety of different shapes, perhaps also new shapes at the moment, perhaps building on some of the old forms, perhaps traditional myths that we have always seen, along with fake news. Some of this content is very blatant, so you immediately recognize it. Some of it is very subtle, and it's very difficult to actually see, is this online hate, is it not? And this is making it very difficult for those confronted with hate speech to actually respond. And it is unclear just what the appropriate ways of responding would actually be. And this is all of the things that we want to discuss with our panelists this evening in various various topics, under various subtopics and rubrics. And I would like to just share my screen now with you to show you what we have in mind for the outline of the evening today. We would like to start with an introductory lecture actually by myself. So I will be talking roughly for another 10 minutes to introduce a common idea of what we are actually talking about when we say hate speech online. I would also like to introduce to you some notions of the prevalence, or I would like to show you how prevalent online hate and hate attacks actually are, and who are the ones which portions of society are the ones that witness these most. I would then like to go into a moderated discussions with our esteemed panelists. They're all patiently waiting behind the scenes at the moment for my cue to come online. We will have a very lively discussion. I am hoping we have invited and we have been able to get a large number of very good experts in the area. I'm very happy about that. And then at the very end, we will have the opportunity for the audience to also zoom in their questions, and some of these will be taken up by our moderator, Professor Buhin, and directed to us so we can discuss these in our panel as well. So let me now introduce to you our esteemed panel members, and hereby also give them the opportunity to show themselves. Let me just start by saying that, needless to say, perhaps we are talking about an issue that really is very pressing in our contemporary times, and it is an issue that no one discipline can tackle on its own. So it is an issue where we have to sort of join forces, and we have to bring to the table a lot of different perspectives to look at the same issue. And this is why we brought together media representatives as well as advocacy representatives, as well as academics that are actually working scholarly in that area. And I would like to start by introducing the panelists to you in an alphabetical order. Let me start with Johannes Baldauf. Johannes Baldauf is Public Policy Manager at Facebook Berlin, where he deals with socio-political issues with a focus on hate speech and right-wing extremism. And he has been working on these topics, especially anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories, for more than 10 years. He really is an expert in the area. And he's also led and developed a number of civil society projects on these issues. And he has accumulated considerable expertise in consulting politicians, civil society, and the media on things like digital literacy, hate speech management. So I'm very, very happy to have him on board. Johannes, welcome to the panel this evening.
Thanks, and thanks for having me.
The next one I would like to introduce is Nadine Brömme. Nadine is project leader of an advocacy network also based in Berlin. It's called Das NETTZ, and it's actually an advocacy network that is specifically working to battle and combat online hate. So she also is like the big person to have here in the panel. She is based in the Better Place Lab, which is a think, do tank. Her work focuses on the social potential of digitalization. And she also has a 10-year experience as an analyst and digital strategist in communication agencies. And I think over the years, one of her big interests has become looking at the influence of technology on public discourse. So this is what she stands for. And we are very, very happy to have her here this evening. Nadine, welcome on board of our panel. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
The next really wonderful expert that I would like to introduce here is Rocío Rocha. She is an academic, one of the academics on board, and she has an interest in looking or examining digital communication with a focus on the emotional dimension of hate speech. And I think she does something very cool. She really does transdisciplinary work, I think, by combining cognitive psychology with linguistics. And that she has done at Humboldt University, studying social sciences and linguistics there, but also she has been working in the area of cognitive media linguistics at Technical University Berlin. And for over 3 years, she was part of a empirical research project funded by the German Science Foundation. It's called Antisemitism in the World Wide Web. This has been a longitudinal study of empirical research into anti-Semitism online, looking at the articulation, the perpetuation, the dissemination, and the manifestation of hatred against Jews on the internet. I am so happy to have you here, Rocío Rocha. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
And let's move on to the next academic on the panel, Heidi Schulze. Heidi Schulze is from the Institute for Communication Science and Media Research at Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich, one very renowned university in Germany. And there she is part of the research lab of Professor Dr. Rieger. Professor Rieger had initially wanted to contribute to this panel, but last minute she was summoned to an administrative meeting. But thankfully, we have one of her team members here with us, Heidi Schulze. Her research interests are located really also in a highly interdisciplinary area of research at the intersection of political and digital communication, public opinion, media effects research, and she uses some really cool computational methods to tell us something about radicalization and extremism online. I am very, very happy to have you here as well, Heidi Schulze. Thank you for joining us this evening.
It's great to be here.
So unfortunately, I won't be giving you the word immediately. I will have you wait a little longer until it's your turn to speak, because I would like to, as already announced, talk a little bit about online hate and what it is. I would like to establish a common definition of what we are talking about here. And I would like to do that by giving a few examples of online hate right in the beginning of our debate. And I would like to also express trigger warning here, because some of what I will be showing in the following is not pleasant. It's actually shocking. And for those of you that have perhaps experienced some of this, it's not at all a pleasant experience. So I would like to warn you of what is going to come in the following. I would then also like to talk a little bit about the prevalence of online hate, especially in Germany, as an example for the global world more generally. So I would like to show you a few examples of particularly Islamophobic and anti-Semitic hate. Just read them for yourselves. And the selection of statements were drawn from academic publications, partly that have specifically analyzed hate online, and also my own collections on Twitter and Facebook. Okay, here we go. When we're talking about online hate, we're talking about aggressive. We're talking about generally derogatory statements. And these are directed against people belonging to specific social groups. So in most cases, in the majority of cases, it's a whole group that is being derogated. It's not individuals that we're talking about here. We're talking about abusive language. We're talking about intimidating language. We're talking about harassing expressions. We're talking about expressions of hatred. Yeah, we're talking about emotional language. And this emotional language, this hate, is directed against people belonging to specific social groups. And that can include a large variety of different social groups, including social categories as various as gender, ethnic origin, even professions can be attacked by online hate, and other mostly disenfranchised social groups. And by this, hate speech is distinguished from derogations that are directed to single individuals, as is the case in individual insults or individual harassment, or something that today we call cyberbullying of individuals. We're talking about group derogatory statements that are targeting groups when we say online hate speech. In terms of the prevalence of online hate, I would like to refer to a few studies that have come up in recent years. These are large-scale surveys of hate speech experiences online. And it is particularly one that I would like to report some findings from. This is a very recent study with over 7,000 participants. And so this is a random sample. It's a representative sample of the German population that we're talking about here. And this is a study that has been carried out by a group of researchers in Jena. And there are other ones, but I would like to particularly point to some of their findings. So they, for example, asked their over 7,000 participants, have you personally seen hate speech or hate comments on the internet? And what we see here, that in the total population, 40% actually agree with this question, they have. And when we look at some select factions of society, for example, individuals with a migration background, the number of people that say yes to this question increases. And when we look at individuals in the age group between 18 and 24, this number almost doubles. So we see here that it is particularly young people that are confronted with hate online. When we look at the targets of online hate that the participants in this survey have recalled, they have recalled targets on a vertical axis as well as a horizontal axis in society. On the vertical axis, if we ask ourselves, who are the people up there on the top of society that are targets of online hatred, you see that it's often politicians in office, as they fulfill a representative function and they are often the addressees of hateful comments. But on the horizontal axis of society, we also see that it is especially groups that have always been suppressed, historically always been suppressed in society, and they are still online, and therefore they have to fight for their emancipation and social recognition always, historically speaking, and they have to continue today. For example, Jewish individuals, homosexuals, women, the unemployed, refugees, Muslims. To the question, have you personally been attacked by hate speech online? The participants of the survey have mostly said no. This you can see in the orange bars shown in the graph. So oftentimes when we witness hate, it's not hate that is directed to us, but we witness hate being directed to others. But some individuals in society have a larger probability of being directed, of being the targets of online hate. And that's, as you can see here, individuals with a migration background, as well as individuals, young individuals in the age group 18 to 24. Finally, what are the personal consequences of experiencing hate speech online? We have a large variety of emotional distress factors that are being displayed on the slide. In the general population, we see this playing out in emotional stress, fear, anxiety, depression, problems with self-image, but also like behavioral, like actual behavioral problems at work, at educational institutions. And we see how this number really rises in the group of individuals that are under 25 years of age. So we really have a clinical problem at the same time with online hate surfacing to this extent. Okay, I don't want to take up more time. I would really like to move to the panel discussion and just show you some of the topics that we will be talking about in varying length. We would like to talk about the shapes in which online hate occurs. We would like to talk more generally about the psychology of hate. We would like to think a little bit about the specific features of the internet that facilitates hate online. We would like to perhaps also on the surface talk about legal challenges. We would like to talk about individual and societal effects of online hate more thoroughly than I just did in the half a minute that I had. And we would like to close the discussion by talking about what we can do. How can we take civic action against online hate? I would like to mention here that not all of these topics will be discussed in relation to the current crisis. Some of these will, some of these won't. So we will change the focus from a specific crisis focus to a more general discussion. The legal challenges are highlighted here in green because among our panelists, we don't really have a lawyer. We don't really have a jurisdictional perspective represented thoroughly. So we want to be a little bit more careful, and we would probably barely scratch the surface of what can be said in this context, but in the other areas, we have a lot of expertise collected here. So I would like to immediately embark on this expertise that we have accumulated and start the discussion. I would like to first of all look into the shapes of online hate and perhaps close the slide share for a bit so we can see larger faces. Let me direct this first question directly to Mrs. Rocha, who is the expert really on in cognitive media linguistics. And I would like to ask you particularly, what are the discourses? what are some of the patterns that you have perhaps been able to see in your work, especially on anti-Semitism online? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So it's actually a big question because there are lots of topics. And maybe I could start out with saying, actually, there's no part of the internet where you cannot find anti-Semitic utterances. We were able to find utterances in small media boards where people were asking about help for their homework. But more or less, there are some prevalent things you can find, and there are some also patterns which we could distinguish. We were researching anti-Semitic utterances from 2014 to 2019, so 5 years. And naturally, it's not possible to look at the whole internet. It's just too vast, and there's many places. So we had to make a decision, and we had help of a technical crawler, and that gave us a lot of text to look at. Naturally, it was websites, it was social media forums, all these places where we looked at utterances. And the patterns we found, well, we ask questions. What we do is I come from corpus linguistics. That means we take a lot of texts, we accumulate them, and then we have hypotheses and questions, and we look into these texts if we can answer that, more or less. And what we did was ask ourselves, what are the patterns? Which stereotypes do we find? Where do we find them? One of the things I already answered, we were able to find anti-Semitic utterances as in classical stereotypes, slurs, denigration, all of these things almost everywhere in the internet. But yes, there were certain clusters, for instance. YouTube was a place where you could find a lot of expressive expressions and very direct slurs. Other places were more indirect verbal communications.
Can you perhaps give us examples for especially the indirect ones? What do they look like? What do I have to look for? Like, will I be able to recognize indirect hate?
All right, so I gave you some examples.
Yes, can I maybe share?
I would say slide 32 would be interesting because it gives an idea what the definition was which we used. Number 32.
Yes.
The overall, just a very short definition of anti-Semitism as something being socially anchored and being a cultural, actually, value which is passed on. Then I have from slides 37 to 39, I recall some examples, but I think these examples are very clear. Let's stay with this one. Go back to the rhetorical questions, please. Yes. Rhetorical questions, for instance, is a way to ask, well, it's not a really question, right? So from a linguistic standpoint, if someone asks, for instance, in this Fragenet, which is a place where people ask all kinds of questions, why does the whole world hate Jews? It seems unambiguous, it seems unclear why, but actually it's not a question, but it's something being put forth already, because it implies that the whole world indeed does put forth hatred toward Jewish people. And the second example, for instance, is also, again, a rhetorical question where someone implies an underlying truth. And that's more or less the problematic or more difficult to grasp anti-Semitic utterances. When it's something which is more or less on a pragmatic level, where you have to have a certain understanding of certain codes or implied messages.
And basically, if we don't have an understanding of these codes, we won't really understand that this is online hate.
Yes, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I'm wondering, thank you very much, Ms. Rocha. I'm wondering, of course, are there any differences in hate speech between different social groups? Maybe Herr Baldauf, could I maybe ask you specifically about this in your work with right-wing extremism expressed on social media? Would you say that right-wing extremism that is expressed, for example, against Muslims differs from online hate that is perhaps voiced against Jewish individuals?
Well, I guess it's a tough question. I'm not a sociologist, but I mean, we see anti-Semitism is coming from nearly everywhere. This is not something that is exclusive to the far right, for example. We see this also in left-wing movements. We see that also your social status doesn't really has an influence on this. And the other thing is, I mean, this is something we can observe, I think, in the last 10, 15 years, especially in Germany, or also in other Western societies. We see some sort of cultural backlash. And so many things that maybe before were more limited to the far right or the radical right are more and more becoming part of the so-called middle of the society. And so, I think it's really hard to answer, but of course we see those things are all on the rise in many societies. And of course, this is then reflected on various platforms because they mirror often the problems or the developments you can see in societies. And then, of course, it often looks like, but I mean, especially in Germany, you often have those discussions that say, is right-wing extremism a problem of Eastern Germany, and so on and so on. And of course, it's not. And so in the end, I think that there is no clear pattern, but I guess many researchers may disagree with this, but I'm not researching this. So yeah, that's my observation.
Thank you very much, Herr Baldauf. I would perhaps like to go back to the definition that Mrs. Rocha was displaying earlier on anti-Semitism. I mean, perhaps one of the connecting threads across all of the target groups that are exposed to online hate might be that there is this outside enemy, that target groups are being made an outside enemy that is then becoming the target of online hate. Maybe we can agree that this is a connecting feature across all kinds of online hate, including blatant forms, as well as the less blatant forms that we have just seen examples of. Do you think that the shapes in which online hate is expressed have changed during times of crisis? Do you think that new shapes have emerged during Corona? I would like to open this question to every panelist on board here.
Maybe I can start if no one objects.
That would be great.
Well, I mean, I think especially when we talk about anti-Semitism, and one of the biggest parts, or let's say problems of anti-Semitism, are anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And especially in times of crisis like COVID, we see that those narratives are adapting to those situations and maybe even evolving. I mean, QAnon, for example, is, I think one of the best examples for this, where you can see whatever happens, those narratives, and so those specific expressions of anti-Semitism adapt to the situation. And we see the same, I think, within far-right narratives. When we look back at 2015, for example, when the main topic of the far-right was refugees, and there over the months you could see that the whole narrative was adapting to look the imagined danger is coming closer and closer, and now they are standing in front of your door and you have to do something. And so yes, it is changing, and I mean, we see far-right trends are emerging every year, so that there's always something new. And all in all, yes, it is adapting to those situations.
Thank you, Mr. Baldauf. I'll just hand the word over to Ms. Rocha.
Yes, in a way, I would say they are adapting, but they're not really changing. I would say, or from our standpoint, it's all these concepts are there. The concepts of othering, the concept of hate. It's all there in our mental capacity. And actually, it's just in certain moments, for instance, in moments of crisis, when people are destabilized and in emotional distress, it's more easy to activate those emotions and this hatred. And then these patterns resurface. So we imagine it as these patterns being there, prejudice, stereotypes, and then being activated. So as in a time of crisis, it could also be a war or other times, it just reemerges and it adapts in a way. But it's the same, they're the same patterns. In anti-Semitic stereotypes, for instance, we found it's still the anti-Judaistic, classical stereotypes. Although we're in 2020, it's still all these really old stereotypes which we see, but which are just renewed nowadays.
Maybe the pattern that you're talking about is just so simple. It's this othering, it's making the outgroup an enemy. That is really easy, perhaps, to adapt to all kinds of target groups and to adapt to the situational demands. For example, in the current pandemic, I just want to show with you a few examples of hate that is directed against individuals of Asian heritage. I mean, we're dealing with that right now. Sorry, I opened this without, wait a second, that was too quick, sorry. And I would like to show you some racism that is being expressed. It happened again. As soon as I click, okay, here we go. Examples of Asians being targeted most explicitly. Toxic tweets are using explicit language to accuse Asians of carrying the virus and blaming people of Asian origin as a collective for spreading the virus. And on the right here, you see some Twitter messages where people are using hashtags travel ban now to express their support for preventing foreigners from entering the country. So it's perhaps the groups are changing, the targets are changing, perhaps the conditions are changing, but in all of this derogatory hate, we see the same pattern. Here, we're seeing an attack on diversity where the image of diversity is directly related to the coronavirus. Here, it's multiculturalism that is actually being blamed for spreading coronavirus. So it comes in different shapes, perhaps new shapes, but embarks on old topics of exclusion and discrimination. And I would like to now connect us to the next topic, which is really the question of why is this happening? And as Mrs. Rocha said, it seems to be that we have at our disposal this this readiness to exclude. And in times of crisis, this cognitive readiness seems to be activated. And when we look at some psychological studies, that have looked into the psychology of hate, we can see, especially in these studies, that it is a specific threat that brings up exclusionary practices in individuals, in humanity. And one of those threats is what psychologists call mortality salience. This tendency is mostly considered in one big theory within psychology. It's called terror management theory. And here this theory is saying essentially that people have an instinct to preserve themselves, for self-preservation, to exist, to be there, to create offspring, to live. At the same time, however, humans are fundamentally vulnerable, ephemeral, and at some point cease to exist. So this conflict between the inevitability of death on the one hand and self-preservation instinct on the other hand actualizes, according to the theory, a paralyzing fear, a fear of death, an anxiety. To mitigate this emotional state, then individuals make use of a variety of different strategies. For example, denial of death or rationalization of death. But there's a specific strategy they also use to sort of come to terms with their vulnerability. And that is that they hold on to their value system, that they hold on to some of the values that they are familiar with. And anything that sort of seems to threaten these values and worldviews is being excluded, derogated, being put down. And at the same time, this reestablishes a sense of self-esteem in individuals. There have been over 400 studies that have been able to show empirically, when you put people into the state of death anxiety, when you increase the salience of mortality to them, then what they will do is they will discriminate, they will become conservative, they will hold on to their own values, they won't accept anything that is not part of their value system, they will exclude, they will derogate, and some of them will also express hate. I wonder now to what extent we can find empirical studies that confirm this. What happens on the internet that perhaps facilitates these processes of derogation in times of crisis? This is something that I would like to particularly ask Heidi Schulze about.
Thank you. There are different kinds of social psychology studies that study this phenomenon, and I would like to focus on two today. The first one addressing mostly why does hate spread, and why does hate spread specifically online? This can be explained via the model of emotional contagion effects. Mm-hmm. So what is emotional contagion? You all should have experienced this before. When you were in a group of people and you had this one friend who suddenly started to manically laugh, and at some point you would start laughing as well, and you wouldn't even know why you started laughing in the beginning. So we know this is the moment. What you experienced there is emotionally contagion. And though of course you could say that hate is not necessarily an emotion, it's a powerful emotional phenomenon that is linked to strongly negative emotions such as anger, contempt, disgust, anxiety. And hate can be contagious within groups. And it has been shown in studies also that hateful messages can be contagious within groups. So even one specific study showed that just one person posting hateful and angry messages within a closed group would change the whole discourse of the group to a more negative one, to a more hateful one. But this brings us to the second aspect, and which I think is an even more important question, which is why do we hate more in computer-mediated environments? So what is the speciality of online communication, of computer-mediated communication that makes us hate more? And we can study this with an effect called the online disinhibition effect. The online disinhibition effect says that there are different kinds of restraints happening when we communicate online in comparison to when we communicate in person. So to speak bluntly, people feel safer saying things online which they would not say in real life. Factors that are contributing to this effect are perceived anonymity online. So when people, because of the screen they have in front of them, feel more anonymous, they're more likely to hate and publish hate speech also. And then the effect of asynchronous communication, so people will not react instantly, but also the lower levels of empathy that are there because there's a lack of interaction with the people they are hating at. And finally, there's a lower risk of sanctions they have to fear online. So there's that's at least what they are perceiving, a lower probability of being held accountable for the things they put online. And this brings us to another important point I will try to make. The connection of hate, so we're talking about why people hate, and the link to why people post hate speech online. Because, and this might be surprising, not all people that are hateful actually publish hate speech online. And this, and on the other hand, and this is even more interesting, not all people that publish hate speech online are actually full of hate in the moment they're posting hate speech. I'm quoting now from research from a friend who extracted 4 different motives of why people post hate speech online. And she's referring to the fact that posting hate speech online is very related to intergroup processes. So first motive to post hate speech online is to intimidate and verbally attack the outgroup. So the people that we perceive to be the outgroup. This could be based on religion, this could be based on ethnicity, and all the groups we heard before. But it's not just about intimidating the other groups, it's also to excluding and devaluing the outgroup in order to strengthen their own positive group identity. So by devaluing the outgroup, you put an increase on your own positive group identity, you increase your self-worth by putting down other people online. Another motive to publish hate speech online is, and this comes very much from extremists online, is that they strategically publish hate speech in order to demonstrate power. And they do this specifically in order to manipulate public discourse. And finally, and this is certainly the most frustrating category of motives of why people post hate speech online, it is just because of fun. So there are people, and there are a lot of people online who just publish hate speech in order to entertain themselves and insult others and humiliate others just for the fun of it. We actually find quite a huge amount of extremist satire websites and funny memes online, which, as I said, is probably the most frustrating motive to publish hate speech.
Thank you so very much for this very detailed account of what is happening in the online world and what are some of the motivations of individuals to go out there and express derogatory views against their outgroups. What is the perhaps self-esteem boosting effect of this? Thank you so much. I wonder, I mean, one of the aspects you have already mentioned, it's the anonymity of the internet. It's the asynchronicity of the internet, where interactions with those that I am excluding are not really taking place. I'm only interacting with people that are sort of part of my in-group, and I can just ward that off. I can switch that off and not even notice that I am derogating the outgroup. I wonder, are there any other specific features of the internet that facilitate expressions of hate that you would like to bring to the table here, maybe the others? I wonder, what are the, in communication science, people say it's the media affordances. What are the affordances of the internet that allow online hate to circulate to such an extent other than anonymity? Would you add anything to this, or asynchronicity? For example, on social media or...
All right, so the findings which Heidi Schulze mentioned from Sola are 2005. Since then, a lot has happened, I would say, but they're still very, very important. I think there have been, I'm not sure which papers they are. I cannot specifically name them, but it's the aspect of the interaction, which you already mentioned, is very important. There is a certain, the social media, and especially the new affordances of the social media, that you're always asked for your comment, that there's a certain atmosphere that everyone can just comment everything. And everyone is also asked to like or not like everything. So these social affordances, the like button, for instance, or also the emojis which you have, where you can now also express anger or other emotions, these things actually also do something to individuals. They are just affordances, but there's an interaction. And I think one of the things which is now being explored, which is very important, is, yes, it's a lot of fun to be a troll, to online show memes and to put other people down. But the more important thing is that you're actually also receiving applause from a crowd which sees you and then which supports you. So you can actually achieve a certain status as someone being a troll. And I think a lot of, this is an important aspect, the interaction.
And we're back to the topic of the boosted self-esteem. You get a lot of attention, you get a lot of likes, you get a lot of interaction, you get a lot of emojis that sort of applaud you. This can be in very negative ways. Applause can come in negative expressions, right? People might be counter-arguing you, but you still get the attention, and that might boost self-esteem. And we're sort of circling around a very central fundamental need of human beings, right? It's self-esteem that goes down, especially in times of crisis. We are uncertain about ourselves. There are some real and some symbolic threats that we are dealing with, and we sort of reestablish our self-esteem by expressing a lot of hatred and getting recognition for it. I was wondering then, why don't we just ban hate speech? Why don't we just go out there into the social media world and just prohibit the expression of hate online? Why don't we just delete all of it and we don't have the problem anymore? Maybe now we're moving into the topic of challenges of banning, the legal challenges surrounding banning online hate. And I want to ask specifically Mrs. Brömme next about this topic.
Of course, thank you. So first to say, the law-focused approach of fighting online hate, just banning everything, it cannot be the only way. It's a mix of different approaches. There are human-centered approaches, tech-centered approaches, and also the law approach. And I'm not a lawyer, as you said in the beginning, but I try my best to give you a brief overview over the current legal situation in Germany. As das NETTZ is an advocacy initiative or networking initiative working together with people from different sectors, from politics, tech companies, and also civil society. We were working with other civil organizations on statements to the current legal situation. And yeah, I can start with my observations. And so hate speech is not a legal term, first to say, in terms of the German criminal code, but it is rather a collective term for various phenomena. Some of them are punishable, for example, insulting or the incitement of people, etc., while others are not punishable. But still, these, of course, can be very problematic and have strong negative effects on both the individual and the social level. The balance with freedom of speech, which is so central in the constitutional state, will always remain complicated. It is not unusual also that different lawyers, judges come to different conclusions, as it is a complex topic. The good news is that the German government has realized that hate speech is an actual problem, and therefore changes on the German criminal code and existing laws are seen as necessary. The Network Enforcement Act, as you know as Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz, is one reaction. In 2017, it came into force, which obligates providers. It obligates providers of social networking sites to take care of reported hate speech. Providers are obliged to check complaints immediately, delete obviously illegal content within 24 hours, and delete illegal content within 7 days after checking and block access to it. Currently, the law is in a process of revision. Last year, we as das NETTZ joined forces with other civic organizations, for example, the No Hate Speech Movement, Hate Aid, Compact, Amadeo Antonio Foundation, Ich bin hier und Reconquista Internet, in order to feed back the revised bill from a civil society perspective. And currently, the Network Enforcement Act is being discussed as part of a larger legislative package for fighting right-wing extremism and hate crime, which was created after the Halle synagogue shooting in October 2019. So the law is there, but it still needs to be signed by the federal president, as some of you might know. And critical aspects on the Network Enforcement Act are, for example, the usability and clear requirements for reporting harmful contents. So reporting should as easy as possible for all users, and this has not been the case. There are differences between the platforms, and the ways to report harmful content are not as easy as they should be. Another aspect is the direct transfer of personal data, which is also one of the biggest critical points. So the transfer of personal data to the Federal Criminal Police Office, which is a data problem. And there is a counter-suggestion from civil society and also political parties, which is called quick freeze. But these counter-suggestions were not considered so far. So it's this is the stage of revision that I mean. It's still in discussion. So this is one aspect of the legal situation. And then there's another aspect of the legal situation, which is additionally to the public prosecution, there's another opportunity to proceed against online hate speech. And this is on a civil rights level. So instead of the public level. The federal prosecutor, one moment, who supports the victim have to contact the perpetrators personally with a lawyer. So on a civil rights level, this is the case, and it is an opportunity, but it's a very also psychological and emotionally challenging way to do so. So for the victims, this can be emotionally and financial burden, as legal processes can take a while, and there's also financial risk because who loses the process has to pay up to 5,000 euros. So, and when you are a victim of digital violence or hate crime, then it's on a psychological level, it's for many people, it's not possible to go this way without support and without any knowledge in this field. So, and that, for example, there's an initiative called Hate Aid that helps with civil rights prosecution. What is important to say is that there are more people following up hate speech or that lawsuit hate speech. And it's important to say that there are successes, and successes encourage others and build new cases, new victories in this case, and it's a kind of deterrence of potential perpetrators also. And then the jurisdiction is obviously changing. A good example of this are the various trials of the German politician Renate Künast. Clearly, offensive terms were first justified with the freedom of opinion, especially because she's in the public as a politician and has to bear such things. And later it was revised, and in the meantime, the perpetrator was held accountable for it. So there are things changing because of these interventions.
Yeah.
And then I want to conclude with some challenges in general. So challenges in general are reports to the police are sometimes not taken seriously. So when people decide to go to the police and it's not taken seriously because it was only on the internet, this can have also emotional effects for people. And so the problem is that the police and public prosecutors, etc., regularly lack the necessary knowledge about the phenomena of digital violence and its effects. Another thing is that resources are absolutely central. More staff is needed in all the institutions involved. And of course, more training and awareness create a sensitivity for those who are affected.
Sorry, Nadine.
I have 2 more points and I'm done. Okay. Unfortunately, law enforcement agencies also have a problem with extremists and racists in their own ranks, as we can see by NSU 2.0. And the drama of this is hard to beat. And then there's the one last point, the cooperation with tech platforms is not always easy. Sometimes data required for law enforcement is released too late. Sometimes not at all. The Network Enforcement Act has certainly made cooperation easier. But also there the devil's in the detail. Data protection, different or partly contradictory legal systems between different countries and so on. So this is just a brief overview, and I hope I could help with it.
Amazing detail, Ms. Brömme, that you have presented here now. I am quite impressed by what you actually do know, despite saying that you don't know. So thank you very much for giving this brief overview. I do see our moderator for the discussion coming back to the panel, but I would still like to take a few minutes to actually talk about one of the most important things that I would like our discussants to talk about, and that is, if the legal banning of hate is so complicated, and if the challenges are so profound, then what can we do? Like, what can we do as media users, and what can we do as institutions to combat online hate? I would like to open the discussion to all panelists in response to this question. Let's discuss this for another 5 to 10 minutes and then open the floor for questions from the audience. So what can we do? Who wants to start? perhaps we can talk about some of the media competence conceptualizations. Heidi, Schulze, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start. I just hope I don't talk for too long and take off all the time.
I will stop you.
Thank you. So there are, of course, several possibilities we can do to address online hate speech. For example, via community management. So we can do the deplatforming, deleting actors from platforms who publish hate speech, and also moderate discussions on online news websites, which all have been shown in studies to improve the overall quality of discourse and mitigate the negative effects they have, which unfortunately we don't have time to talk about. Anyhow, there's also the possibility of publishing counter narratives, which I would define as the professionalized version of counter speech. So to publish campaigns on, for example, YouTube. But we've seen the problem here is that when people see a counter narrative YouTube video, they are often also shown actually hate speech videos and radicalization videos. So counter narratives have proven to be rather difficult. So one of the most important aspects is counter speech and in connection media literacy, I would argue. And we already briefly mentioned the Ich bin hier, I am here campaign, which is a campaign probably we all know, a very successful counter speech campaign who in a Facebook group organized to sort of improve the discourse when hate storms arise or hate speech is being published. And this is very important because research has shown that if people are not aware of hate speech, they don't know what hate speech looks like, they will probably not be able to realize it and they won't be able to act on it. So if the study, for example, has shown that in an online environment, if people see other people there, they are less likely to react to counter speech or engage in counter speech. It's called the bystander effect or the bystander apathy. And so we really need to educate people to show what hate speech looks like. This in terms of critical media literacy is referred to as the awareness factor. So just that people, and this is, I mean, this is already the first step we're doing here today, right? To show people that hate speech exists and show them what it looks like. Because this is the second level of critical media literacy, that people are actually able to see what hate speech look like, understand the patterns of it. And then in the final part, which is called empowerment, we teach them how to tackle hate speech, give them this, the certainty that how they can do it is good. And often just saying something positive in a hate speech discourse is better than not saying anything at all. Try to make it short.
You have already mentioned the Ich bin hier initiative. This, maybe we can talk a little bit about this initiative for those that don't speak German. Ich bin hier, I am here, and maybe also about similar actions from civil society and advocacy groups. I would like to ask perhaps Nadine again to talk a little bit about the possibilities of these groups that they offer.
Yes, of course.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Brömme, I apologize. I will only say we received a lot of very interesting questions that I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time to answer. I think your responses are already getting at some of this. There were a lot of questions about what can be done, but I want to also make sure that we leave at least 15 minutes toward the end to answer some of the questions.
Give us 3 more minutes.
Okay, I try to answer very short.
Yeah.
So Ich bin hier is an online community. It doesn't only exist in Germany. It is originally from Sweden, actually, And it's a counter speech initiative, and they prevent the spread of toxic discussion cultures in social media by using the mechanic or the algorithm that is in the social network. Like they started on Facebook, so accumulated likes are prioritized by the algorithm. So they go into discussions and post counter speech or counter narratives, and also activate their community to like the positive narratives, so that the positive narratives are ranked higher in the discussion. And this is quite important for discussions, because only the I don't have the correct number, but I think only the first 3 or 5 comments are actually read in an online discussion on social media. So it's very important to have like the right arguments and not toxic words and phrases in the top of the comment section. So this is Ich bin hier, and while Heidi was just talking about the bystanders, so this is what Ich bin hier does is quite important. Not everybody has to be active online, but it's not possible to activate everybody, but people who read should not get the impression that the toxic narratives are the dominating in our discourse, and that's why Ich bin here is very important. But to your question, what needs to be done, Özen, I wanted to add that research is very important, because regarding this example about the bystanders, we don't know who are the bystanders. So we are talking about them, that we need to activate, and online civil courage needs to be shown. But there might be also bystanders who are who are interested in like more the right wing dynamics. So and there's not enough research about this topic, for example. So research is also very important. And yeah, so I make a point.
Thank you very much, Nadine. One of the things that we should perhaps all be aware of is that it's really a very small number of individuals that do post online hate. And that gives the impression as if online hate was sort of all over society, and it is sort of in a very representative view of the attitudes that exist in society. But we have to always keep in mind that it's a very small portion of media users that actually post online hate, and it's a very, very small portion of users that then like online hate. We're talking about a very small community that has a huge effect. This being said, I would like to now open the discussion to questions from the audience. Maybe we can take 1 or 2. Let's see what they are. Professor Buhin.
Yes, and thank you to all the panelists. And I want to thank our audience members. Questions are pouring in, and we're going to collect them and see if we can find a good way to also continue to answer them offline, because we certainly won't get to all of them. They're really excellent, and they span really all of the topics. There are a couple of questions that really touch on social media platforms and their role. So I would like to maybe start with those, and I'll combine a couple. So one question asked if we know, is there a difference among the various social media platforms in terms of how much hate speech they contain? And following up with that, I will combine it with how can social media platforms strike a balance between enabling freedom of expression and censoring hateful or harmful comment or content, sorry.
I would just like the panelists to give very brief answers from now on.
I could briefly comment on the amount of hate speech in different kind of social media platforms. So we see that actually the amount varies a lot. Of course, it's difficult, but because as soon as you have closed off groups, we don't know the whole amount that there actually is, but we know that from the big platforms, Twitter is one which has about 1 to 10% of hate speech on it. And what we know is also that on fringe websites, we see far more hate speech. So a study of my of my supervisors showed that about 34% of the postings on 4chan, 8kun, and Reddit were hate speech. So this is a massive amount. And the more fringe a website or a social media platform is, the more hate speech we see there.
I would like to just elaborate what Heidi said. I would say it really differs in every country, which social media platform is interesting and prevalent. And we, for instance, for Germany, in our study found it was YouTube. YouTube had a huge impact on well, all kinds of hate speech and very, very derogative slurs, threats, death threats, the most expressive examples. And so I think it really depends on which age group also, then again, you're looking at. And in every country, it's a different platform, I would say.
Should I also add something?
Sure.
Okay. But of course, I also don't know where's the most hate speech, but to give some perspective globally, we, for example, removed in the second quarter of this year, I think 22.5 million pieces of content because of hate speech globally. And so, of course, I cannot break this down for specific countries, but yeah, I think there this gives a slight impression of the things. But again, like it was mentioned before, this doesn't mean that the majority of content is hateful content on our platforms. It's more like a small portion. But of course, people who are working on those topics are finding those things. And I think that there was a second question. Can we repeat it, please? Because
about
I
balance,
remember.
freedom
Yes,
of expression, and
part of the question,
anti-discrimination.
Censorship and free speech.
But I think,
yeah.
go
Please
ahead.
go ahead.
Herr Baldauf. No, it's
Okay.
the word yours.
Okay. I think this is one of the toughest questions because yes, this is one of the biggest challenges, not only for platforms, but I would say for every society we have right now. And so yeah, I mean, we are an American company, so of course freedom of speech is of very high value for us, and of course this is different to yeah, how things are perceived in Europe, and this of course is, let's say, some sort of cultural clash and part of the big debate we see not only in Germany but also in other countries. And I mean, I think in Germany it's often the perception that there needs to be done more because yeah, then people, politicians, the media and so on, they're saying, look, you're not taking down enough content. But we have many other countries where it's the opposite way, where people say, look, you take down way too much. And so, of course, there is no right answer how to balance this than just saying, I guess no one really will be satisfied with the way it is done, because this is how the world works. It's always a compromise, and it's a hard compromise. And but as you can see, let's say, just over the last months, we try to always evolve and adapt our policies to face the challenges that are arising. And so even, I don't know, if some people are not satisfied with the actual status quo, this may change in a few weeks, in a few months, or even years, because yeah, societies change, our policies change, and so on and so on. And so yeah, I guess there is no single answer or even an easy answer to this question.
Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely no easy answer. We have a question related to a really current topic, and that is, can political and social satire content, like for example, the new Borat movie, contribute to increase of hate speech?
maybe one of the things that I can say about this topic is that media psychologists have shown that the embeddedness of hate in the context of humor and satire is something that makes hate appear less harmful, but actually it is one means to spread more hatred and actually to make it, to voice it more in the context of humor, then you could otherwise voice it in the normal context. So humor and satire make hate sayable more than other, I would say, linguistic means. I'm not an expert on this, but there is media psychological research that shows that the more humor is surrounding propaganda, for example, and exclusionary rhetoric, the more will audiences also buy into those and will agree with those.
Yes, but I would argue from a linguistic standpoint, and I looked at radical right-wing usage of, for instance, Pepe the Frog. So, yeah. And I looked at this whole area, which is called linguistics also. So it's using just for the, it's a whole fringe movement in Reddit and 4chan and stuff, but still, I would make a difference. I would really argue that there's satire and then there's art, and it's important for certain topics to be discussed in a satirical way. But then there's also, and that's true, irony and humor being used to more or less mask hateful content. And that's something that the radical rights in the alt-right in America has been doing. And we also see now in Europe that it's being used. Nonetheless, humor is still a very important, and satire is still a very important facet to counter hate also. And very empowering.
Thank you for raising this point. Yeah, very important.
We have a question about, do we have any studies that directly link online hate speech with actual hate crimes?
We have correlational studies, but as you all know, correlation is not causation. So we can't really say is what is happening online, is hate speech online actually the cause of hate crimes? We don't know, but there's a correlation, and there's a high correlation between the two. At the same time, there's a lot of research. I mean, there's a lot of research, especially that was carried out in the US on violence and do violent media, for example, in computer games, violent computer games, do they make individuals also more violent? Do they make them express more aggression in their real life behavior? And we have seen that the contribution of social media or media more generally is actually very, very low. And it's a contribution that goes hand in hand with a host of other factors that come into play, like the personality of the user, the media user. That's a very important criterion, and it's often the personality characteristics of the media user interacting then with the media itself to propel individuals to become more and more violent and aggressive and then display that in the real world. But that, I would say, really is limited to the interplay of person factors and media factors, and there's no one direct line from using social media to going out there and committing hate crimes. It's a lot more complex than that.
I can briefly add on this. Actually, I mean, we've seen that considering large-scale terrorist attacks, talking of Christchurch or the attack in Utøya, so far-right violent crimes, the people were very active on fringe media such as 4chan or 8kun, and they published a lot of hate speech there also. So they analyzed the digital communication prior to their attacks, and what they saw is that the terrorists were not necessarily more hateful in their comments than other commentators. So this supports, of course, your argument, Özen, that It's other factors that contribute more to it, but it is one factor in the big, difficult picture.
I think maybe we can take one more question, maybe a simple question, please. A simple question.
We're not getting very many simple questions. Our audience is asking excellent questions, really wonderful. I'll try to combine two because they're somewhat related. So
we have 3 minutes. 2.
The question is, should we install computer competencies as a school discipline? And can curricula counterbalance the hatred that's being absorbed in each household? So family upbringing versus school curriculum.
I would say yes to the school curriculum. I think all of us would say yes, 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 from very early, from primary school on, yes, yes, yes. The second question, I didn't quite understand. Maybe the others did.
It seemed to be like perhaps Mr. Baldauf wanted to react.
Yeah, I can. I mean, it's not, yeah. It's basically, I mean, if I understood the question right, if we would have such a curricula, which of course I also support, media literacy competence on dealing with the world in general is highly appreciated. But is this able to counterbalance, if I got the question right, things that are happening within families or even education? I mean, I think here psychologists in this round, so they are way better prepared to answer this, but I fear not. I mean, of course, education is an important part, but it's not everything. So yeah, that's my short answer.
One more contribution from Ms. Rocha, and then I will wrap it up.
All right. I just wanted to say, like, we've also found in our studies, it's not the educational background, which really, there were anti-Semites in all, even very, very educated ones. And there's people using all kinds of hate speech, although they're very educated. It's more about that there's a normalization of hate, that the social media space has given us so many possibilities to show hate, to process it. And important is that more or less we work on a community management, or we work on our skills online, that we use principles and morals as guidelines for how we treat each other. And I think that is something probably which is in a media literacy course, I could imagine being very well, or being very nice to have. Sorry, but it's more or less, it lacks civil society control in these new social media spaces. And I would really just make a point of saying, we really have to look and work towards that hate is not normalized in these spaces, and that we report hate, that we counter speech hate, and that we also find help if we're affected by that.
I think that these are really good closing words. Thank you very much, Ms. Rocha, for that. I am very impressed by what each of our panelists brought to the table in terms of different perspectives and issues that we could discuss, I think, in a whole lecture series just on online hate. Maybe we should think about this. I really appreciate the perspectives that you brought to the table here. I appreciate very much also the questions that came from our audience. I think we will find ways to respond more thoroughly to them in writing. And one of the things that I want to mention here is that there will be a follow-up email sent out by Touro College Berlin to all of those, to all of you who have participated today in the audience. We also appreciate your presence here. There were almost 80 individuals that participated in this discussion. We will be sending you a follow-up email with some more information on research on online hate, as well as avenues for combating online hate and reacting, for showing civil courage. And we will list a few links, online links and institutions that you can reach out to and work with them that can also support you and help you if you are encountering attacks yourself. What I wanted to say that in this follow-up email, you will also see announcements of further events that are happening at Touro College Berlin. We will have an open house very soon. So just stay on board with us if you've become interested in the topics that we like to discuss. With this being said, I would like to thank all panelists for their contributions this evening. I would like to thank Professor Buchin for moderation. I would like to thank our technical support, Philip Bauer, who has been working in the background. We can't see him, but he's always there. But I would most of all like to thank one person who has been working so hard for this panel and who has actually been the initiator of this. That's Tal Gibesh. She is a very important person in our college, and I thank her from the bottom of my heart for making this possible and for your help and support and everything. I am extending to you a huge bouquet of imaginary flowers. I hope you all have food for thought for the evening, for continued discussions on online hate and maybe also more uplifting topics. I wish you a very nice evening, everyone. See you again very soon, I hope. Goodbye.